Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mind Your Mission, and happy February. I hope your year is off to a good start and that you've been encouraged by our first few episodes of 2026. As I prepared for each episode this year, I've personally found myself doing a lot of reflection, just pausing to ask if I'm actually on track and whether the way that I'm spending my time, the content I'm consuming, and the people that I'm surrounding myself with are truly drawing me closer to Christ. My hope is that you've been encouraged to do that same kind of honest check-in as well. And if you have, I wanted to pause and say, we would genuinely love to hear from you. We can look at numbers all day long, but none of that really matters to us if we're not actually reaching hearts. So, if this podcast has encouraged you in any way, it would mean so much to us if you took a quick moment to either leave a review, send us a message on Instagram, or email us. All that information's down in the description box. Or if you know us personally, you can always send us a text too. The feedback that we've gotten seriously means the world to us, and we'd love to hear from more of you. We also love getting to pray for our listeners and to know who it is that we're actually walking alongside through this show. So I'll pause, give you a second to do that. You can do that right now.
Unless you're driving, then you can
Yeah,
hit like
if you're driving, pull over, leave us a review. No, I'm just kidding. Just do it when you stop. Anyway, moving on. So this month, we felt very inspired by the fact that, Valentine's Day decor has been in stores since basically the day after Christmas. So we're going to be talking all about prioritizing marriage. And in a culture that tells us that love is about chemistry, compatibility, or constant romance, it can be hard to know what love is supposed to look like when life feels ordinary or busy or exhausting, or all three. Scripture gives us a very different picture of love than culture does, one that's far less about feelings and far more about faithfulness. So today we're going to talk about what it actually means to love your husband in a God-honoring way, not perfectly, not performatively, but faithfully, right in the middle of everyday marriage. Now, if you're not married yet, then I wanted to point you to an episode that we did last year around this time where we shared our best 10 pieces of relationship advice. I definitely encourage you to give that one a listen. But I also want you to keep listening to this one and this month as we talk about marriage, because just like we talked about last month, you have to know where you're going in order to get there. And if you desire marriage one day, then having a proper biblical view of marriage shapes the decisions that you're making right now. Before we dive too deeply into today's conversation, I wanted to share something that's been on my heart from this past weekend. My family and I had the opportunity to attend an Officers Christian Fellowship retreat with cadets from the Coast Guard Academy. And if you're a newer listener and didn't know, Liz and I both went to the academy. So it was really fun to plug back in to that community. And that same retreat during my freshman year at the academy was actually a really pivotal moment in my faith. It was when I first began taking my relationship with the Lord seriously, which led to me getting baptized that spring by Liz, funny enough. So being there last weekend, almost 4 years out of college, felt both really full circle and honestly a little strange. I still definitely feel like I'm a college student. Like in my head, I'm still that age, but realizing that I'm no longer one or even close to one, honestly, was kind of humbling.
4 years is
Um,
crazy. Being
yeah.
4 years out of college, I'm like,
Well, the fact that it's been 8 years since we started, like since we graduated high school, I'm like, and the fact that I've known you like almost 8 years is pretty crazy.
yeah, it feels like literally we were there yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so while we were at the retreat, my husband and I were asked to sit on a relationship panel one of the evenings and answer some questions from the cadets. And one topic that came up several times, just phrased in different ways, was this idea of emotional boundaries in dating. If you've been a Christian for a while, then the idea of physical boundaries is probably not very new to you. That's a conversation that many of us have heard before. But emotional boundaries are a little less clear cut. A lot of people have heard that phrase, that idea, but they don't really know what it means or why it actually matters. And the way that I think about emotional boundaries ties directly into what we're talking about today, which is prioritizing marriage. So I wanted to kind of give you my overview of emotional boundaries. In Christian dating, you're not just dating for now, you're dating with your future marriage in mind. And that means that you have to consider your future husband, whether or not the person that you're currently dating ends up being him. In other words, you're called to prioritize your future marriage and honestly, your boyfriend's future marriage too, even if it's not to one another. And one way that we can do that is by being really intentional about how far ahead we allow our hearts to go. It's good and wise to talk about the future in dating, conversations about values, faith, family, calling, and even some logistical things to help you evaluate compatibility. But emotional boundaries come into play when our hearts start living in a future that has not actually been promised to us yet. Things like mentally naming your future kids or picturing holidays with extended family or making details in your head, like detailed plans in your head long before the relationship has actually reached that level of commitment. Those are small things that quietly create emotional attachment faster than the relationship itself is moving. I'm definitely guilty of having done this in the past with other relationships. And another thing that I fell into was falling in love with the person I thought my boyfriend could be, not who they were right at that moment. And when these things happen, it becomes really hard to discern clearly, harder to walk away if needed, and harder to hold our relationship with open hands before the Lord. Another aspect of emotional boundaries is not allowing our faith to become dependent on the other person. One guy at the retreat asked whether or not it's okay to like pray and do Bible study while dating. And I think it's okay. And I think the answer is yes. Dating it, and I'll say that dating someone who loves the Lord, it's a beautiful thing, but your relationship with God was never meant to be sustained through somebody else. Spending time in the Word together is good, praying together is good, but those things should never replace time alone with the Lord. And that's true even in marriage, too. Emotional boundaries to me means cultivating a faith that stands on its own, one where you're seeking God personally, spending time in prayer independently and growing in your walk, whether or not your boyfriend is next to you. And then along with that, it's important to have community outside of your relationship, friends who know you, mentors who speak truth, and people who can offer a perspective that isn't emotionally like tangled in the relationship itself. Because when your boyfriend becomes your primary emotional support, spiritual encouragement, and community all wrapped in one, it creates a weight that your relationship was never meant to carry, especially before marriage. Emotional boundaries aren't about withholding love or being guarded by fear by any means. They're just about honoring the season that you're in and protecting your heart and stewarding both your future and somebody else as well. And when you view dating through the lens of prioritizing marriage, not just a marriage, but a God honoring one, it changes how you act, how you attach, and how you discern. So I say all that. I know that's a lot to just like throw at you right off the bat, but I say all that to point out that prioritizing marriage doesn't just start on your wedding day. It's not just applicable for those of you that are married. It happens in engagement, dating, and singleness as well. So for those of you who aren't married yet, there's your reason to keep listening. So with that, let's get into it. A few reasons why marriage needs intentional prioritization. So a few of these reasons are that marriage doesn't fall apart overnight. It erodes through neglect. It also needs prioritization because many couples love each other deeply but stop tending the relationship. I know that I have been guilty of this, especially in the baby years. And then also, good intentions are not the same as intentional actions. In Ephesians 5:15 through 16, it says, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of time because the days are evil." So if we don't choose to prioritize marriage, then something else will always take its place. You'll either be too busy with kids or work or overcome by stress or find yourself just in survival mode. So all of those are reasons why we need to really intentionally prioritize marriage and have conversations about it.
I love what you were saying at the beginning of the podcast about emotional boundaries. I thought you just said it so long. I feel like dating is something I've thought about in like a long time, but it like
Mhm.
kind of brought me back because I definitely could have saved myself a lot of heartbreak in college had I known that more. I
Yeah.
feel like we both would have saved ourselves a lot of heartbreak in college. So we're speaking from experience here, but I kind of going through that experience in college kind of taught me in the future to not jump to marriage in your head when you're years away from it because it can really hurt your heart and hurt the other person too. And I really liked how you brought up like when you are dating someone, you should be thinking about like dating intentionally because you might marry somebody else and you want to make sure that you were as intentional as you could and respected the other person well. So I thought that was beautifully said. But going back to marriage, I feel like postpartum has kind of opened my eyes a little bit to how much intentional care marriage needs, especially like after having a baby, because before it's like just you and your husband, like you have all the time in the world together. But once you have a baby, it's kind of like you're handing off the baby. You're more of like teammates, which can be fun. Like it's definitely had a fun aspect of that being able, when my husband was here, being able to work together, and just kind of bond over like the baby we created. But it definitely, we didn't get as much time alone. So I didn't realize really how much, I mean, I knew things were going to change, but I didn't realize how much I took the pre-baby time for granted. Like, I think you always look back and you're like, wow, I kind of like I
Mhm.
love the season I'm in now. Like, I love being a mom. It's been amazing. But I think part of you will always grieve, like, a little bit of what you had before you had the baby, because 'cause you're like, you'll get that again eventually one day, but for the next while, you won't, and so I look back sometimes, I'm like, "Wow, it was sweet," and I appreciate all the fun times that we had together, just us, and I'm excited to step forward into this next chapter and create new memories with our son. But anyway, when I'm talking about marriage, I'm not speaking from having it all figured out, because you've been married
We're
almost 4
almost 4.
years, and we're almost 3, so it's like, we're
Not that
just
long.
no, not very long. I haven't seen too many seasons, but
Mhm.
we'll just speak for, like, newlyweds straight outta, college marriage and stuff and what we've learned through that. Because I feel like I do get a lot of questions from, like, younger girls about marriage and everything, but, yeah, we're definitely not coming from a place of having it all figured out. And I feel like it's hard for me to talk about marriage right now because it feels like my husband's deployed, and I don't know, it kind of feels like you're not like I am married, but you
Mhm.
feel kind of like you're
Yeah.
single. Not like I'm not living like I'm single, but it's like it's just me and my son. And I get
Mhm.
to talk to my husband here and there, but it's hard to talk about it a little bit because 'cause I'm like, "Wait, what are ways to prioritize
Yeah.
your
When
husband in
Nolan was
marriage?"
when Nolan was on patrol when Weston was first born, I had to start saying, like, solo parenting because I kept saying single parenting, but I'm like, "I'm not a single parent, I'm just solo parenting right now."
I know.
Clarify. I am
Same.
married.
Yeah, it's like I still am married, but sometimes it feels like you're not, even though you are. But because my mind is pretty much consumed with taking care of a 2-month-old. But I'm trying to really use this season away from my husband to kind of intentionally improve myself so that when he gets back, like our marriage can become even stronger. So I'm really working on myself right now. That way, when he comes back, we can kind of put these things in to practice. And as I reflect and think about what we can do to improve our marriage during this time, I realized that marriage is more than just being a functional team. It's not just dividing responsibilities or surviving the week. It's like talking with each other and hanging out with you can and like actually getting to know each other. And I remember I listened to a podcast years ago and there was a statistic that the average married couple only has like 20 to 30 minutes of meaningful conversation per week. And I remember hearing that and like I still remember it to this day. So it really did scare
Mhm.
me. And thinking about it now reminds me that marriage deserves more than the leftovers. It should be like that order that they talk about. It should be like God, then marriage, then kids. I feel like I really don't want to flip it. And right now it's kind of hard because when you have a baby, it's like they're
Yeah.
kind of all consuming. But it really should be like your marriage above your kids, and I feel like that's something that sounds kinda controversial, but I think it is biblical and God honoring, but in this season, it's kind of all baby, but in the future, that's something to remember, and I remember something Matt and I did earlier on in our marriage. I felt that really allowed us to prioritize our marriage, and I really wanna put it into action when he does come back because I really enjoyed doing it. We would do, like, a weekly check-in. I don't know if you guys have done those, but the questions we would ask each other, and I think I got this from somewhere. I don't know where, but I probably heard it when we first got married and, like, got it from that. But we would ask each other, "What's one thing that I did this week that made you feel loved?" And then, "What's one thing I did that maybe didn't make you feel loved?" And then, "What do you need prayer for right now?" And then, "What does this upcoming week look like for you?" That way you aren't caught off guard by plans or anything. It's always good to communicate those. And something I'm also realizing as my husband is gone that dating each other, like, still matters even if we're not together. I still need to put time to talk with him because we are able to talk a little bit. So, like, FaceTiming and just talking about our day and also, like, just calling late at night, making that time even though I'm tired at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I might not wanna debrief my whole day, but taking that time, that way we can still stay connected and not really drift apart. And then, like, when he is home, like, we might not be able to go on date nights for a minute because it's kinda hard to leave a newborn at home, and we don't live by family. So, unless we pay a babysitter, it's like, we're probably gonna be home, but I think prioritizing the time that we are at home, like, sitting on the couch after the baby goes to bed and, like, hanging out and talking with each other so that it is more than that 20 to 30 minutes. So, it doesn't have to be, like, a glamorous date night where you get dressed up and go out. It can be something simple as just, like, hanging out, having popcorn, and watching a movie together or just doing fun stuff together. I really wanna be intentional when he does come back with the small pockets of time that we have when our
Mhm.
son is actually sleeping,
Yeah.
'cause which is rare. I'm just reminded, like, in all this reflection and going through this and preparing this episode was really good, I feel like, to kind of center myself around marriage again. To be reminded that romance doesn't die from a lack of time, it dies from a lack of intention.
Yeah. I'm laughing and I just feel the need to reiterate again that like please don't think we have this all figured out. In fact, I feel way underqualified to be recording an episode like this, and I think the part you just said is what's been hitting me most recently. It's just that the intentionality doesn't have an end date. Like we have to be intentional for the rest of our lives, which is kind of intimidating. And like I knew that that's what I was stepping into, but man, it's harder than I thought. It's harder in different ways than I thought. 4 years into marriage, like 2 kids, the honeymoon phase has definitely like come to an end, and marriage has become more work now, and more often than not, I find myself just too lazy to give it the intention that it deserves and the attention that God clearly asks me to give it, especially like in these baby years. Like, yeah, I have a good excuse, but it's still just an excuse. God calls me to put it first. And it's hard to do when you have kids. And when I get to the end of the day and I feel overstimulated and touched out and I just need a minute to myself. And it's really hard to discern like what is justified need for rest and rejuvenation and what is not so much, what is on the selfish side. So either way, organizing our lives to prioritize marriage needs to happen. And I think that it's also hard because culture's view of love is very different than a biblical love. Culture says that love is about how someone makes you feel, that it should feel effortless, and that if it's hard, something must be wrong. But that is not at all what scripture says. In fact, in Ephesians 5:25, many of you have heard this, but it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So like, yes, it's talking to husbands here, but this is just showing that marriage as a whole, like it's equating it to Christ giving himself up for the church. Like that does not sound easy to me. So the thought that marriage and love is going to be easy is kind of a false idea. And really, biblical love is sacrificial, it's intentional, and it's others focused. It's not sustained by emotions, it's sustained by obedience and commitment. Biblical love doesn't ask, what am I getting? It asks, how can I serve faithfully today?
Yeah, I feel like culture sort of puts marriage in this place where your spouse is supposed to fulfill you. I feel like that's a common idea. And your spouse is supposed to complete you and heal you and make you whole. But the truth is, I think the part that we're missing is that only God can do that. So when we ask our spouse to carry a weight that they were never meant to hold, we end up disappointed and feeling resentful and constantly kind of searching for more because they can't fill that God shaped hole in your heart. And another hot take that I have is that culture I feel like it is a hot take, but I think you would agree with me that culture kind of pushes this idea that there's the one out there for you, like there's a perfect person, and if you find them, the marriage will be easy. And I don't believe that because I believe that if two people are genuinely pursuing God, then a marriage can be redeemed and restored and grown, even when it's messy and even when it's hard. And I feel like when you think there's the one, when things get hard in your marriage, you might start searching, thinking that you picked the wrong person. And I think that can be a common reason people split up is they think they made a mistake, they married the wrong one. But if two people are pursuing Christ, like you can make a marriage work, I think. Two godly
Mhm.
people come together can make a marriage work. Because marriage is a covenant. Love isn't something you fall into, it's something that you choose every single day. And culture sort of tries to make love look emotional and instinctive, especially like Hollywood and movies and books and all that stuff. But biblical love makes it look intentional and sacrificial. Because I think culture teaches us to base love on what we get. And I feel like I've fallen into this too. Like we base it off of how we feel, how we're treated. But scripture teaches us to love because he first loved us. And love isn't selfish, it's self giving and it's choosing to serve the other person and forgive them and stay rooted even when it costs you something. And I feel like one of the biggest struggles for me in marriage, which I feel like is common, is learning not to live just for myself. And because before marriage, my life was self directed by myself, and marriage has required me to learn and keep learning how to lay myself down for somebody else. And it reminds me of Philippians 2, verses 3 through 4, where it talks about doing nothing from selfish ambition, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. And I feel like becoming a mom has intensified this even more. You kind of start at marriage and you have to be more
Mhm.
self sacrificing. Not to the extent of motherhood, though, I feel like. Now it's like taken up a notch further. So it kind of prepares you for the season of motherhood a little bit. But now it's even less of me and I have to give even more sacrifice. But also this season has brought, like, way more purpose than I've expected, and this is kind of going off topic, but it does tie into marriage, so I wanna talk about it because I saw a video on Instagram this past week, and I don't know if I've ever related to a video on Instagram more, and it really hit home, and it talked about how in early marriage, it was kind of glorified, like, the dinks, dual income, no kid life, which we saw on social media, and it was just like made you kind of wanna stay in that season as long as possible, and it made you fearful of having kids, and kinda like the fear-mongering, the kids are gonna ruin your life and all that stuff, and I feel like I kinda fell into that. Like, I always knew I wanted kids, but I definitely wanted to stay in the dink life longer than I did, but then God changed my heart, thankfully. She said something like, "When my life really started when I had kids, it gave me so much purpose," and I just related to that so much just now becoming a mom. As scripture tells us that children are a blessing and not a burden, like social media and culture will say. In Psalm 127:3, it says, "Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward for him." And I wanted to get your take on this because I don't know the right answer, but there's this cultural idea that you get married and you should wait a few years and then you should start a family. And I do think there can be wisdom in waiting because I think in Deuteronomy, it talks about like newly married couples are given a year to focus on each other. But I've also like felt convicted with God's command to like be fruitful and multiply because we did wait a bit before we had a baby. I think like a year and a half maybe before. It was about a year and a half probably until before we got pregnant. And I've, like, had to ask myself, like, was that wisdom, like, or was it fear, or was it something that God was actually asking of us? I don't know. Like, obviously, now I've started a family, so it's not something I really have to, like, wrestle through too much. With
Mhm.
hindsight, this is, like, a good time to have a baby, at least when I look back to our years before, I'm like, it would have been more difficult, but that's not necessarily means we shouldn't have just been, like, gave it to God and
Mhm.
seen what happened to our family. But I wonder if you have a different take on this, but I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I think it's something you really have to pray through and talk with your husband about and surrender to God and seek his wisdom for your marriage. Obedience isn't just copying someone else's timeline. It's faithfully calling you to what God's called you to do. But yeah, I was curious to hear your thoughts because I don't know if there's a right answer. I've heard both sides of it, I feel like.
Yeah.
So, and I know you did have a baby quicker than you had anticipated.
Right. Yeah. I have a few thoughts on this, but bottom line, like you mentioned, I think it's different for everyone, and I think the conviction is really important here because I don't know that there is an answer to when you should have kids or when I don't think that scripture even gives like a clear command on this. Like, yeah, it talks about being fruitful and multiplying. And I think part of the purpose of marriage is to have kids. I mean, that's just the creation design. But I've caught myself thinking about this even when it comes to like how many kids we want to have or when, like the timing between kids. Last night we were at the pool and I was swimming with Weston and he's 2, so he doesn't know how to swim by himself yet. And I was sitting there in the pool with him, and I was looking at Nolan and Haven. They were on the side just hanging out while Haven was sleeping in the car seat, and I was just thinking, like, "Man, how many years it's gonna be until I can, like, go to a pool and, like, relax." Like, cause in my head, I'm like, "Okay, like, my number right now is 4 kids, like, maybe 5." But I'm thinking, like, "Okay, like, that's years before I can sit at a pool and confidently just chill out, not stressing if my kid's gonna drown." And I think I can understand it made me understand in that moment why people only have 2 kids, people only have 1 kid, people don't have kids at all, like, there's so many things throughout being a mom that have made me realize, like, why people don't wanna be a mom, and also, I will say, like, we talk about so much on our podcast how we believe that, like, the design is that moms should be with their kids primarily throughout the day, like, not maybe go to work more than you're with your kids kinda thing. But I will say, like, some of these days recently have at the end of the day, I'm sitting there thinking, "Wow, I would love to go to work." And, like, I feel sad thinking that thought, and I still wouldn't choose to go to work, but the feelings are definitely there. This is kind of a long-winded way to say that I empathize and I get why people wanna wait. I get why, um you only have a few kids. Like, I get all that deeply and emotionally. Like, I truly understand that on a deep level. But I will say that I am beyond thankful that we got pregnant by surprise because making the decision to have kids would have been hard. Like, finding the right time would have been a challenge. But I'm thankful that it happened by surprise because I say this all the time, it's changed me in more ways than I can think. And I'm so thankful for that. And when it comes to marriage, what I'll say is that our marriage wasn't hard until we had kids. We were only married a short time, like you alluded to, so, like, we didn't have all that much time to experience life married without kids. Like, I don't know exactly what that would have been like if we had done it longer, but for me, the hard work of marriage, like I can say marriage didn't get hard until we had kids, but I could also frame it as marriage, I didn't start putting in hard work to our marriage until we had kids. And so I think that progression that you're kind of talking about of have kids, wait a few years, like I think it's good to get to know one another and to become friends and all that. But also, as husband and wife, you're going to grow and change so much throughout the years. And the person that you get to know within the first 3 years of marriage before you have kids is going to be way different than the person that you are the 20, 30, 10, even 5 years from now. And so I think regardless of when you have kids, you're going to have to continue putting in the work to know your husband. And that's something that like I know I can do better in this season as I've stopped pursuing him as a friend, like just getting to know him because he's changed in the 4 years that we've been married. So long way to say there's no answer. Conviction is super important. One thing that I was thinking about too with this question is that if you're not connected to your husband, and pursuing him and getting to know him, then it's going to be even harder to make these decisions about kids because I think God gives us each other in these big decisions. And if we're not able to deeply understand where each other's at when it comes to these big questions, then it's going to be even harder to make the decisions. So, what does love mean biblically? I think love means action. It's not just affection. In 1 John 3:18, it says, "Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and truth." It's just remembering that feelings come and go. Love is choosing faithfulness when feelings are quiet, tired, or stretched thin. And just remembering that love isn't proven in grand gestures, it's proven in our daily posture.
Yeah, when we talk about biblical love, we can't separate it from Jesus because biblical love isn't defined by feelings, it's defined by sacrifice. And scripture tells us in 1 John 4 that God is love, not that God shows love or that God teaches love, but that his very nature is love. So this means that every expression of true love finds its source in him. And the clearest picture of love is the cross. Jesus didn't go to the cross because it felt good. He didn't go because we deserved it. He didn't go because we proved ourselves worthy. He went because love chooses sacrifice, and biblical love looks like laying down your life for someone who can't repay you. There's nothing you could do to repay Jesus. And biblical love isn't based on performance, it's based on the covenant that he had with us, and it's the same thing for marriage. And First John also tells us that we love because he first loved us, which means our ability to love others doesn't come from our own strength, it comes from having been loved by God first.
Yeah, some practical ways that came to mind to love our husbands just in everyday life are one, through respect and encouragement. These are all things, again, I'll say I need to work on greatly. In Proverbs 18:20, it says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." So speaking belief instead of correction over your husband, affirming effort, not just outcomes, letting encouragement be louder than critique. I feel like, especially in the baby years when I am just get to the end of the day and only gets home and I am at my wits' end, and then he says one thing and I am critiquing him all the time instead of encouraging him so I can get better at that. And then another thing I can think of is just speaking life instead of criticism. Criticism really attacks identity. Correction without respect erodes safety, and encouragement builds trust and connection. And I know that our words so deeply shape the atmosphere of our home. So being really intentional with the language that we're using, and then creating emotional and spiritual safety is also really important. So listening to our husbands without trying to fix things, especially as a type A woman, I feel like I do this a lot. And then just actually praying for your husband, not just saying that you're praying for your husband, and then praying with him whenever it's possible, and then choosing gentleness is important, especially in times of disagreement or in times when you're feeling stressed. Like there's can't just combat stress with more stress. Like you gotta be gentle with your words.
Yeah, and I wrote down a few that I also have ways to love your husband. So I wrote a little list. So I'll just start going through that. Some of them are pretty similar to the ones you touched on. Respecting his decisions, like specifically, I feel like you mentioned being type A. I'm type A in certain aspects, but I think it's important to really honor your husband's leadership and choices, even when you fully don't understand them. Like, yes, your make your perspective known, but at the end of the day, respect his decision, and that builds trust and creates a foundation where your husband feels supported rather than questioned by you. That's something we've talked about in our marriage a lot because I can just make my own decision. It's not always the I'm very quick to make decisions. Sometimes it's the right one, sometimes it's not. And I really should consult Matt more and respect his ultimate decision. But I also think it's important to share your perspective, but do it in a gracious way. because I can share it in kind of more of an aggressive way. And then also not nagging your husband, I feel like this is something I have just read about a lot in books, and everyone says that, and they talk about instead of, like, repeatedly bringing up gripes, take them to God in prayer and ask the Lord to work in your husband's heart and guide your own responses because often God will change both of you in the process, and so I feel like that's really important because I won't get into, like, too much detail, but I feel like this recently just happened for us where I was super convicted about something, and he wasn't necessarily, but I knew it was the right decision, so I just prayed about it, and then we kind of got on the same page about it, so I think prayer is super important because it can change both of you. So instead of coming at him and just, like, saying, "No, we need to do this," which I did do a little bit. Mhm. I think prayer is the thing that'll really change your husband's heart, not your nagging. That'll probably just turn it off more. And then also, I think it's so important to believe in your husband because I think one of the most powerful ways to love your husband is to believe in his abilities and his God-given potential. Because when your spouse sees that you trust him, it can unlock like courage and confidence and growth that he didn't even know he had. And I've really seen this in my own marriage. My husband, since we got married, I feel like has grown really strong in his faith. Like he was strong in his faith before, but I feel like he's really grown now, like really taken up that leadership role of like leading the home. And he's really gotten into theology, which I feel like he wasn't as into before. And like he obviously was a Christian and believed in God, but he's really like in the depths of theology, like more so than I am. And I feel like when we had our first job in Houston and then we were transferring and he didn't really know what he wanted to do. And I thought he would really like this one job. And so he put in for it because he thought he could do it because I thought he could do it, and it's a very rigorous training process, like, a lot of people fail out, so we didn't know if he, like, would necessarily make it, but I think partially because I showed confidence in him, he was able to do it, and so it's been really cool to see him grow in that because your belief in him can literally shape the man he becomes. Because the man I married is so different from the man I married now. Like, they're both awesome people, but now he's just a much stronger believer and stronger husband and male figure and everything. So I've just gotten to see how your encouragement can really shape your husband. And going off of that, I think it's really important to push them out of their comfort zone, like support them in challenges and opportunities that stretch them and make them grow. Because I think sometimes they just need you to push them and they're like, my wife believes in me. I got this. So I think it's important to encourage them to take those steps. And then also showing interest in his passions. I feel like this is important in any relationship that you have. Like ask questions and learn and engage with what excites him. Because I think genuine curiosity shows that you care about him and not just the role that he plays in your life. And then finding activities that you enjoy together, I feel like is something that we have really valued in our marriage. And obviously it'll probably look different now in the baby years, but I think shared experiences create connection. So before this, I just think back to our time in Houston, which is like a really sweet time in our marriage. I feel like we're both really into like working out and we would go on like super long runs together on Saturday. And that was just like so fun for us, like spend the whole morning going for a run and then going to get food. Like I don't our life probably won't look like for a while. But I mean, we can still go for a run with James when he's old enough and then go get food. So it doesn't all disappear. But I just think that was really sweet because it was something we really enjoyed doing together. And that he always pushed me to be better in that because I was normally training for something. And he would like do my workouts with me. And so I feel like that was really an intimate time that we got to have together that made our marriage stronger. And it's running something we've always really enjoyed doing together. So finding that one thing that you guys really enjoy doing together, I feel like can be important and also cheering him on, like celebrating his wins, both big and small, and be present and support his goals and show excitement over his achievements because I think that communicates your love and your partnership in a very tangible way. So those are just some things that I feel like I've learned through my minute years of marriage that
Yeah, I'm taking notes because genuinely some of those, like, I need to seriously do because I feel like one thing I say to friends a lot is that Nolan and I are working on our friendship because it's very true. Like, we've been really good business partners recently in the last couple of years, but we haven't been the best friends, and some of those things are really speaking to that, just cheering him on and understanding his interests and finding similar interests. Like, we're working on those things and finding things that you can do with babies, and it is so hard to just put that above the kids because and I know it's important because I want them to see how much I love their dad, but to it seems silly to get a babysitter or something like that, but when it's for the sake of our marriage, like, that needs to happen. So anyway, I'm genuinely taking notes and gonna take some action on some of those things. But
It's all
I
my
feel like
pre-baby advice because
yeah,
like that
it
was also
was,
before baby.
but I mean, it all still applies post baby, and I think it's easy to make excuses. It's a good excuse. Your kids are a great excuse, but still not worth sacrificing your marriage for. Anyway, let's talk about some common pitfalls that can quietly undermine love. I feel like the first one I can think of is keeping score. Remembering we have to remember that love is not transactional and grace cannot exist where scorekeeping lives.
Yeah, I feel like this takes me back to the very beginning of Matt and I's marriage because I think this is something we really struggled with because he's always been more of a servant than I have, so I feel like he would always do more.
Mm.
And he would say he would keep score. He would try to keep score of it. We've gotten over this, but this is like something that was probably one of the bigger problems in the beginning of our marriage because sometimes it feels like it's perfectly balanced and you're both giving 100, 100 and you're able to do that. And other times life shifts and it's more like 80-20. I'm also kind of lazy. At least
Yeah,
I
me
did.
too.
I find that when Matt is here, I get lazy. When he's not here, I'm not lazy because I
Same,
know, yeah, I have to do
same.
it all. But when he's here, I'm like, I can finally relax and just like actually like, I don't know, I just can relax and chill a little bit more. And I sometimes will take advantage of that.
I feel like no
So
one will be shocked to see me without him here. He'd be like, "Wait, you can actually do all this stuff?"
yeah, it's like the motivation now. I'm like meal planning, the most productive state I've
Yeah.
ever been. Then Matt comes home. I'm like, I can't do the dishes, but I need to not take advantage of that because Matt is such a servant. He will do no complaints. But I think a way that I can serve in marriage is giving more effort. But I feel like also in pregnancy, when I was super sick, he had to pick up all the slack. I didn't clean the house for months. He was cleaning it. I couldn't really eat, so I guess he cooked for himself. I didn't make food for months. Anyways, so he had to pick up a lot of the slack then, which I'm grateful for. And then now he's gone, so I have to do all the household and family responsibilities on my own. Except I have a nice neighbor I don't know who keeps bringing my trash cans up. I think they know I'm struggling
Mhm.
because I take my trash cans down and it takes me a minute to get to them. And lately they've just been back up at my house, so someone's bringing them up, which is funny. I don't know who's doing it, so they must know I'm
Nice.
going through it. But anyways, I feel like to go back to, I feel like it's easy to just make a tally in your mind of who's doing what instead of appreciating each other and understanding there's different seasons that you're in when one person might be have to give more than the other. It's not always going to be even. And yeah, just not keeping score of that I think is super important, but also speaking to myself here to not be lazy and take advantage of the other person's like self-sacrifice.
Mhm.
Do that.
I think another pitfall is letting resentment grow quietly. In Hebrews 12:15 it says, "See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble." So, I feel like unspoken resentment always surfaces eventually. Most of the time it surfaces in a moment when it's less than ideal. And, I think bitterness thrives in silence, and especially when we're busy taking care of the kids and there's not an opportunity to have a quiet and calm, under control conversation. Sometimes my bitterness comes out and my resentment comes out in not so healthy ways. So I feel like finding tools to communicate, like having those planned check-ins like you were talking about earlier, where you can really evaluate, like having a time where you're ready and open to receive feedback and also give feedback, I think is important so that it doesn't grow into something that's not able to be dealt with in a great way.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't even realize how quickly that this can happen until I was like freshly postpartum. Because those first few weeks, to be honest, I did feel resentment towards my husband,
Yeah.
which I think is common. And it wasn't that he wasn't being loving or supportive, he was super helpful, but my hormones and exhaustion and vulnerability made me
Yeah.
feel like misunderstood at times. And I don't think he knew what I needed. And I wasn't communicating what I needed.
It's
And
hard
so,
to explain what you need in that state.
yeah, emotionally,
Especially
you're
when, like,
just
they
kind of
can't do
unwell.
a lot of it just with breastfeeding and your mom intuition and all that.
Yeah, they really can't do much other than, like we even had a meal train, so there really wasn't much she could
Yeah.
do besides, like, clean. But I learned through that it's important to talk about the resentment because I was kind of holding it in until it, like, all exploded one day, and I feel like holding it in only allows it to grow more, and you need to have open and honest conversations with each other where you can work through those feelings and gain understanding and strengthen your connection, and it might be hard in the moment, like, what you have to try to say it in a gracious way, but it might hurt your partner a little bit in the moment, like, when you are talking a little bit about the resentment that you're feeling, but at the end of the day, once they know, you can kind of work towards getting past that. And so I feel like that's something I was kind of shocked about. All my emotions postpartum were a lot. I'm
Mhm,
feeling a lot better now. But I look back at that first month and I'm like, yeah,
mhm,
it
mhm.
was you're emotionally all over the place.
Yeah, I feel like an idea to contrast this thought, on one hand, like, bitterness hold on, let me rephrase this. On one hand, resentment can grow if you don't discuss things, but on the other hand, like, it's okay to hold your tongue sometimes and not say everything that you're feeling. I feel like in in our society, it's often, like, expressed that we need to communicate everything and tell them how we're feeling and take every emotion to them. But sometimes, like, it's okay to reflect on your feelings and be like, okay, maybe I don't need to tell them how I was feeling because I probably shouldn't have been feeling that way. I think I was reading about this in one of Abby Holberstadt's book, maybe the M is for Mama one. I was reading in one of her books this idea that like we don't like not every thought that we have is a good one, and we don't need to take every emotion to our husbands because we need to bring them to the Lord and like sort through them with Him first because oftentimes like they're not going to be an edifying thought. So just to contrast that, but then another pitfall I thought of was that we sometimes expect our husbands to be our saviors. In Psalm 146:3, it says, "Put not your trust in princes and a son of man in whom there is no salvation." So just remember that your husband is not meant to fulfill that hold that only God can. And we set unrealistic expectations of them. It just breeds disappointment. So just remember that you need to seek the Lord to be your savior, not your husband. Like that is just tying everything together. Like we need to prioritize God, husband, then family. Like if we do that, then we'll be pretty golden. And then another thing that can help us with all of this is just reframing the mission that we can reframe marriage as our ministry. Marriage is a calling, it's not a contract. Loving your husband is part of your walk with God, is part of our walk with God, and faithfulness at home matters to the Lord. Like that is a big part of our mission as women if we're married and if we want to be married one day, it's just understanding that loving your husband is something that God says is good, and it's something that He calls us to prioritize. In Colossians 3:23, it says, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." And this is, I mean, marriage is part of that. Work heartily at it. It's not just something that's going to thrive without you putting in any work. Treat it like a job. Like you should work at it. And just remember that loving your husband is not an interruption to your mission. It's part of it. I feel like in the girl boss era, sometimes we can feel like our husband and our family are just a distraction or a hindrance to our mission, but our mission is not to like have this platform and gain a bunch of followers and be a name that everybody knows. Like marriage is our mission, motherhood is our mission. Like all of this is part of our mission, and so we have to treat it like God says to.
Yeah, we touched on this idea a little bit earlier, but I wanted to expand on it a little bit because I think it really goes into the marriage is our ministry topic. It was talking, I think you had mentioned about how marriage models Christ's relationships with the church. And Christ loves the church sacrificially, and he sacrificially gives himself for her. And we are called to love our spouses in that same way. We're supposed to be intentional and patient and selfless. And marriage becomes a living picture of that relationship. It's not just about companionship or convenience, it's about reflecting Christ's love and his faithfulness and grace in a everyday way. Ephesians in Ephesians 5, it talks about how husbands are to love their wives as Christ loved the church, and wives are called to respect and support, submit to their husbands. And that doesn't mean one person has all the weight. It means both of you are showing in different ways what it looks like to follow Christ in a relationship. And when we view marriage this way, it changes everything. Arguments aren't just disagreements, and they're opportunities to practice forgiveness. And busy seasons aren't stressful, they're opportunities to serve sacrificially. And every small act of love, encouragement, or patience becomes a reflection of God's heart. And marriage as a ministry isn't about perfection, but it's about modeling Christ's love in a way that is visible to not only each other, but your children. Like it is such a ministry to your children. So it's so important, I feel like, to work on having a strong marriage now so that when our kids are able to like kind of understand that
Mhm.
it is pointing to Christ's relationship to the church, because we want our kids to understand that relationship. And the
Yeah.
first thing they see that models that relationship is their parents' relationship. So I think it's so important to really make that a priority, and also to those around us. Like people all the time are seeing how you interact and how your marriage is. And if they see there's something different about your marriage, they're going to ask why. And so I think that's why it's so important to, that's why our marriage is our ministry. And it's important to have this view of the relationship with the church and try to model that in the best way we can, because when we choose to love like that, even in the hard seasons, like the early baby years, we're participating in something that's far bigger than just us and our marriage, the greater relationship of Christ's relationship with us. So I think it's important to have that in mind as you are going through marriage, and marriage is your ministry. The purpose of marriage is self-sanctification and raising kids, yeah, but also the purpose of marriage is to reflect Christ's relationship with the church and allow other people to understand that, because your relationship might be the only picture of Christ that other people have. If they're not Christians, not going to church, they might question what's different about your relationship than someone else's. So that's an important reason, I guess, to prioritize your marriage.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening to this today and thinking, wow, I fall short in this, you're not alone. I'm feeling that way.
Yeah.
But it's not about perfection, it's about direction. And God honors our faithfulness and He works through the small, quiet obedience. And the way that you love your husband right where you are with what you have matters more than you may ever see. So, as we continue this month talking about prioritizing marriage, my prayer is that we'd stop striving to do it perfectly and instead just commit to doing it faithfully, because the small, consistent acts of love offered to God can really and are what really transform our marriages over time. So, thank you so much for listening. Again, if this encourages you or if you enjoy listening, we'd love to hear from you, either commenting on whatever platform you're listening to or messaging us or emailing us. Again, all that's down in the description box below. With that, this has been Erin and Liz helping you mind your mission.